On the 3rd of December 1979, English rock band The Who were scheduled to play a concert at the Riverfront Coliseum in Cincinnati, Ohio. A performance eagerly anticipated by thousands of fans who regarded the band not merely as musicians but as symbols of rebellion, catharsis, and generational identity. And from the earliest hours of that cold winter day, the city began to feel the pull of an event that promised intensity, volume, and release, as fans traveled from across Ohio and neighboring states, many of them teenagers and young adults, bundled in coats and scarves, clutching tickets that granted them access not to a specific seat but to a concept known as festival seating, a system that eliminated assigned locations inside the venue and instead rewarded speed, endurance, and aggression, a policy that had been promoted as democratic and exciting but in reality fostered anxiety and competition, because the best views near the stage would go to whoever crossed the doors first, a rule that quietly transformed anticipation into pressure long before the music ever began. As the afternoon faded into evening, lines outside the Riverfront Coliseum grew longer and denser, wrapping around the building as temperatures dropped, and with no numbered entry system, no staggered admission times, and no clear crowd lanes, the mass of people became a single restless organism, shifting and compressing as individuals tried to maintain their place, some having waited for hours, others arriving late and attempting to push forward. While inside the arena, preparations continued routinely with lighting tests, sound checks, and stage adjustments producing deep echoes and sudden bursts of noise that reverberated through the concrete structure, sounds that many outside mistook for the concert already beginning, a misunderstanding that was magnified by poor communication from venue staff and a lack of visible authority capable of calming the crowd. And as rumors spread from mouth to mouth that The Who had taken the stage or that doors had opened at another entrance, anxiety intensified into fear. Fear of missing the opening song, fear of being trapped too far back to see anything, fear of losing the experience they had paid for and waited all day to claim. Shortly before the scheduled opening time, a small set of doors was opened briefly to admit a limited number of people. A procedural action intended to reduce congestion but one that proved catastrophic in context. Because from the perspective of the thousands still outside, it appeared that the gates had finally opened, triggering a sudden, powerful surge forward as the crowd pressed toward the entrances in unison, driven by instinct rather than intent, by momentum rather than malice, as those at the back, unable to see what was happening ahead, continued pushing forward under the assumption that movement meant progress, while those at the front were crushed against glass doors, concrete walls, and immovable barriers, their bodies compressed from all sides as oxygen became scarce, lungs unable to expand, feet lifting off the ground, arms pinned uselessly, voices swallowed by the roar of the crowd. And in seconds people began to fall, slipping on the pavement and disappearing beneath a tide of bodies, creating a deadly pileup where those on the bottom were trapped face down or on their backs, unable to breathe, their chests compressed by the weight of dozens of others, while above them, panic spread as people screamed, cried, and begged for help, yet were themselves unable to move or even understand that lives were being lost beneath their boots. Because crowd crush is silent in its deadliest moments, not marked by visible violence but by invisible suffocation. Security personnel, few in number and lacking training for mass crowd emergencies, were slow to grasp the severity of what was unfolding, and by the time police and emergency responders forced open doors to relieve the pressure, the damage had already been done as 11 young fans, some still clutching tickets, some separated from friends they would never see again, lay lifeless on the ground, victims of compressive asphyxia, a form of death that leaves little outward injury but steals breath and consciousness with terrifying efficiency, while dozens more were injured, some sustaining broken bones, internal injuries, and trauma that would haunt them long after the physical wounds healed. Inside the arena, the majority of the audience remained unaware of the tragedy, their excitement building as they waited for the lights to dim. And in a decision that would later become one of the most debated and criticized moments in the history of live entertainment, city officials and event organizers chose not to cancel or delay the concert, fearing that an announcement about the deaths might incite panic or unrest among the thousands already inside. And so The Who took the stage and performed, delivering a powerful, thunderous set as they always had, unaware that outside the venue, bodies were being covered with jackets and emergency crews were performing resuscitation attempts that would fail, a haunting juxtaposition between celebration and loss that would later weigh heavily on everyone involved. It was only after the final notes had faded and the band returned backstage that they were informed of what had happened, a revelation that left members of The Who shocked, sickened, and deeply remorseful, particularly Roger Daltrey and Pete Townsend, who would later state unequivocally that they would never have played had they known lives had been lost. A sentiment echoed by many fans who later grappled with the moral weight of having unknowingly cheered and sang while others died just beyond the walls. In the days that followed, Cincinnati entered a period of mourning and reckoning as families identified bodies, planned funerals, and struggled to understand how a night of music could end in such devastation. While public outrage grew over the use of festival seating, the lack of crowd control, the inadequate number of trained staff, and the absence of clear emergency protocols, leading to lawsuits against the city, promoters, and venue operators, as well as intense media scrutiny that brought national attention to the dangers of unmanaged crowds, prompting cities across the United States to re-evaluate their policies, with Cincinnati ultimately banning festival seating entirely, a move that would influence venue regulations nationwide and contribute to long-term changes in how concerts and large gatherings were organized, including assigned seating, controlled entry systems, improved communication, and a greater emphasis on crowd science and risk assessment. Yet for those who were there, no reform could undo what had happened, because memory does not follow policy timelines, and survivors would carry the sounds, the pressure, the confusion, and the guilt with them for decades, some haunted by the knowledge that they had stood only feet away from people who died without ever realizing it, others haunted by the sensation of being trapped, lifted off the ground, unable to breathe, convinced they were about to die, while families of the victims were left with empty bedrooms, unanswered questions, and a grief compounded by the knowledge that the deaths were preventable, the result not of fate but of human decisions made and unmade. Over time, the tragedy at Riverfront Coliseum came to occupy a solemn place in the history of live music, not as an indictment of fans or performers but as a stark lesson in how quickly excitement can turn lethal when safety is treated as secondary to profit and spectacle, and how crowds, when misunderstood and mismanaged, become forces of nature rather than collections of individuals, forces that obey physics rather than compassion. And as years passed and the Coliseum itself was eventually demolished, the memory of December 3, 1979, did not fade with the concrete, remaining alive in survivor testimonies, in policy changes written in the names of the dead, and in the quiet understanding shared by those who study crowd disasters that every major reform is paid for in blood, and that the true legacy of that night lies not only in the music that was played or the lives that were lost, but in the responsibility to remember, to study, and to ensure that no audience ever again enters a venue unaware that the most dangerous moment of a concert is not when the amplifiers roar, but when the doors first begin to open.